Hell to pay. Grave warning issued to Iran as Trump weighs action. On February 20th, 2026, inside the White House Cabinet Room, with his national security team seated around the table, President Donald Trump issued one of the clearest warnings any sitting American president has ever directed at a foreign government. You will be shocked by 5 facts about this. Number 1. What Trump said. Tehran's leaders have to make a deal to stop their nuclear program, or there will be hell to pay. That was not a rally line. That was not a social media post crafted for engagement. That was a direct threat, delivered inside a national security briefing, while 2 of the most powerful aircraft carriers on Earth were already moving into position within striking distance of Iran. The next day, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood at the podium and amplified the message publicly. President Trump has made it very clear: you can negotiate, or there will be hell to pay. No ambiguity, no diplomatic softening, no room for misinterpretation. And here is what should arrest the attention of every person watching this right now. Those words were spoken the same day the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest and most advanced aircraft carrier ever built, entered the Eastern Mediterranean. I am not naming anyone as the Antichrist, but I am telling you that the nation at the center of this confrontation is the same nation Ezekiel named by name 2,600 years ago. To understand why those words were spoken on that day, you need to understand what had just collapsed. Indirect negotiations between the United States and Iran had been proceeding through Oman as a mediator. The talks were not face-to-face. American and Iranian negotiators were in separate rooms with Omani officials carrying messages between them. The format itself tells you something about the level of distrust. These 2 governments cannot sit at the same table. A second round of talks had taken place in Geneva on February 17th. There was cautious optimism, not breakthrough optimism, but enough to keep the diplomatic track alive. And then it stalled. By February 20th, the talks in Muscat ended without agreement. The core gap remained unbridged. The United States demanded that Iran permanently abandon its enrichment capability, dismantle its nuclear infrastructure, address its ballistic missile program, and sever ties with regional proxies. Iran refused every demand that touched enrichment. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei had already declared on February 17th that uranium enrichment is an undeniable right, and that Iran's ballistic missiles are essential for deterrence. Foreign Minister Araghchi stated plainly on February 22nd that zero enrichment is not on the table. Iran offered concessions: temporary suspension of enrichment for 3 to 5 years, sending half of its enriched stockpile abroad, a regional enrichment consortium on Iranian soil with international oversight. But none of these proposals met the red lines Washington had drawn. That is the context in which President Trump sat in the cabinet room and said hell to pay. Not in frustration, in calculation. Because, as you will see in Discovery 3, the military assets required to back up that threat were already in place. The warning was not aspirational, it was operational. But to understand why that threat carried the weight it did, you need to understand what the United States already proved it was willing to do. Because this was not the first time Washington struck Iran. Operation Midnight Hammer, the most significant American military strike against a sovereign nation's nuclear infrastructure in history. And it happened less than 8 months before the words hell to pay were spoken. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers launched from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. They flew approximately 37 hours with aerial refueling, crossing the Atlantic, traversing European and Middle Eastern airspace and arriving over Iranian territory undetected. Each B-2 carried a payload designed for one purpose: destroying targets buried deep underground. The primary munitions were GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators. 14 of them were dropped on hardened nuclear facilities. Each MOP weighs 30,000 pounds and is designed to penetrate over 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. These are the largest conventional bombs in the American arsenal. They exist for exactly one scenario: destroying facilities that are built to survive everything else. A U.S. submarine launched Tomahawk cruise missiles at additional targets, striking from a direction Iran could not anticipate. The Pentagon's post-operation assessment estimated that Operation Midnight Hammer set Iran's nuclear program back approximately 2 years. Centrifuge manufacturing facilities were severely damaged. Testing plants were destroyed. Laboratories connected to weapons research were eliminated. No American casualties were reported. No Iranian casualties were reported from the strikes themselves. President Trump declared afterward that the operation had completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Iran admitted severe damage, but downplayed the long-term impact. But here is what matters for this moment. Operation Midnight Hammer established a precedent. The United States demonstrated that it possesses the will, the capability, and the precision to strike Iran's nuclear infrastructure directly. It proved that American stealth technology can penetrate Iranian airspace undetected. It proved that the deepest bunkers are not beyond reach. And it proved that a sitting American president will authorize kinetic action against Iran when he determines that diplomacy has failed. Iran remembers what that looked like, and so does Washington. This was not the first warning. Hell to pay is the second warning. And the force assembled to back it up is not 7 bombers. It is an armada, the largest since 2003, and it is already in position. Which brings us to what is sitting in the water right now. The USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered Nimitz-class supercarrier, 100,000 tons of displacement, over 5,600 crew members, a floating military base carrying dozens of the most advanced combat aircraft in the American arsenal. The Lincoln arrived in the Arabian Sea from the Pacific in late January 2026. Satellite imagery from February 15th, captured by European Sentinel-2 systems, placed it approximately 200 to 400 miles off Iran's southern coast near Oman. That positioning puts every major target in southern and central Iran within strike range. Nuclear facilities, missile production, sites, command and control bunkers, ports, airfields, all reachable by the Lincoln's air wing or by Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from its escort destroyers. The Lincoln's strike group includes at least 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Spruance, the USS Michael Murphy, and additional escorts, each capable of carrying up to 90 Tomahawks. 3 littoral combat ships based in Bahrain provide near-shore operations and defense against Iran's fast boat swarm tactics in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf. From the south, pressure. Iran's entire southern coastline is within range of a force it cannot match, cannot deter, and cannot outrun. But the Lincoln was only the first piece. And what arrived on February 20th, the same day Trump issued the hell to pay warning, changed the equation entirely. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever constructed, over 100,000 tons, nuclear-powered, electromagnetic launch systems that allow faster sortie rates than any carrier in history. An air wing including F/A 18E Super Hornets, F-35C stealth fighters, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, and E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning platforms. The Ford entered the eastern Mediterranean on February 20th, the same day as the warning. The same day the talks stalled. The same day Iran concluded joint drills with Russia. Its strike group includes at least 4 guided missile destroyers: the USS Mahan, the USS Bulkley, the USS Roosevelt, and others, carrying approximately 5,000 additional personnel. From the Mediterranean, the Ford can strike targets across the Levant and into western Iran through overland corridors, or it can transit the Suez Canal and join the Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, creating a dual-carrier formation that would concentrate overwhelming naval air power within direct striking distance of Iran from the south. 2 carriers, 1 region, 1 deadline, and a combined sortie potential of up to 800 missions per day. This is the largest U.S. naval concentration in the Middle East since 2003. 2 of America's 11 total carriers, roughly 20% of the nation's carrier strike capability, focused on a single adversary, backed by over 120 additional warplanes, surged to 8 regional air bases. On the same day President Trump issued his warning and the Ford entered the Mediterranean, Iran was not retreating. It was escalating. The Supreme Leader had already declared enrichment an undeniable right. The Foreign Minister had stated that zero enrichment is not on the table. Iran's atomic energy chief had declared publicly that no country can deprive Iran of its nuclear enrichment rights. 3 of the most powerful figures in the Iranian government, within the same week, delivering the same message: unified, absolute, no retreat, no concession, only defiance. And the actions matched the words. On February 19th and 20th, Iran hosted joint live-fire naval exercises with Russia in the Gulf of Oman and near the Strait of Hormuz. Not symbolic exercises. President Trump publicly set the window: 10 to 15 days maximum for a meaningful deal. That timeline opened around February 19th, which means the deadline falls somewhere in early March 2026. But here is the detail that transforms the deadline from a diplomatic tool into a trigger mechanism. U.S. officials have clarified that strike readiness already exists. The carriers are positioned. The air bridges are established. The targeting packages are prepared. The command and control infrastructure is operational. The force does not need 2 weeks to be ready. It is ready now. Trump himself stated publicly that an attack could come at any moment. Those are not the words of a president waiting for a deadline. Those are the words of a president who has already been briefed on the strike options and is measuring the diplomatic clock against the military clock. The next round of talks was scheduled for Geneva on February 26th. New U.S. sanctions were imposed on February 25th, targeting over 30 individuals, entities, and vessels in Iran's shadow fleet, the network of ships used for illicit oil sales that fund Iran's nuclear and proxy programs. The financial pressure is tightening alongside the military pressure. Deadlines in diplomacy are signals. Deadlines during military positioning are leverage, and leverage has an expiration date, because the carriers will not stay in position indefinitely. The crews have been deployed for months. The operational tempo cannot be sustained forever, which means the window of maximum pressure is itself a finite resource. And every day that passes without a deal is a day closer to the moment when the pressure must either produce a result or be applied kinetically. Jesus described exactly this kind of moment. On the Mount of Olives, seated across from the temple, speaking privately to his closest disciples, he answered their question about the signs of the end with a specificity that should stop every person watching this. Matthew 24, 6-8. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. You will hear, not one war, not one headline, a constant drumbeat, a relentless saturation of conflict reports, military buildups, nuclear brinkmanship, proxy alerts, carrier movements, and ultimatums. The sound of a world straining under the weight of its own hostility. Look at February 20th, 2026, through the lens of those words. Wars, Operation Midnight Hammer already struck Iranian nuclear sites 8 months ago. Active armed conflicts burning simultaneously across multiple regions. Rumors of wars, hell to pay. 2 carrier strike groups within striking distance. A 10 to 15-day deadline. Public statements that a strike could come at any moment. Houthi repositioning. Hezbollah on alert. The entire Middle East bracing for a conflict that has not started but feels inevitable. The rumor of war doing the work of war itself. Shaking markets. Moving energy prices. Forcing governments to calculate. Creating fear without firing a single missile. Nation against nation. Iran defying the United States. Russia conducting joint drills with Iran while simultaneously attacking Ukraine. Israel coordinating with American forces. China reportedly sharing satellite intelligence with Tehran. Kingdom against kingdom on every axis simultaneously. And Jesus said, "See that you are not troubled." That command is remarkable. He did not say these things will not happen. He said they must happen. They are the beginning of birth pains. The word in the Greek is Odin, labor contractions. They come in waves, each wave stronger than the last, each one closer to the next. Not the birth itself, the contractions that announce it, increasing in frequency, increasing in intensity, building towards something that has not yet arrived but is unmistakably approaching. And Luke recorded an additional detail from the same discourse that speaks directly into this week. Luke 21, 25-26. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Distress of nations with perplexity. The Greek word is aporia, no way out. Iran cannot accept the terms. The United States cannot accept defiance. Israel cannot accept a nuclear Iran. Russia cannot abandon its ally. Every nation locked into a position from which retreat is politically impossible. That is aporia, no way out. Exactly what Luke described. Men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Not for what has arrived, for what is approaching. Now, we open the passage that has made this week impossible for students of Scripture to ignore. Because Ezekiel chapter 38 does something that almost no other prophecy in the Bible does. It does not speak in symbols that require centuries of debate to decode. It does not use figurative language that can be stretched to fit any era. It names nations directly by their ancient identifiers. And the nation that a sitting American president just warned of hell to pay is one of them. Ezekiel 38:5. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, written in the Hebrew text as Paras, and this identification requires zero interpretation. The ancient Persian Empire occupied the exact geographical territory that modern Iran occupies today. The heartland of Persia was centered in what is now the Fars province of Iran, a name that preserves the ancient root to this day. The designation Persia was used internationally in diplomacy, in treaties, on maps, and in everyday usage until 1935, when Reza Shah Pahlavi formally requested the international community to refer to the country as Iran. But in the prophetic scriptures, Persia and Iran are one and the same. The relationship between Israel and Persia in the 6th century BC was not hostile. It was providential, sacred, an alliance ordained by God Himself. So when Ezekiel, writing in that exact era, looked forward in time and described a future moment when Persia would march against Israel as part of a hostile military coalition, the prophecy would have been incomprehensible to his contemporaries. Persia just freed us. Persia just rebuilt the temple. Persia is God's chosen instrument of restoration. How could Persia ever turn against us? The relationship was too deep, the alliance too strong, the reversal too unthinkable, and yet here we are, 26 centuries later. And Ezekiel does not describe Persia as a passive participant in the future coalition. The phrase with shield and helmet is military language, active engagement, a nation armed and marching in formation, a nation prepared for war, not observing, participating, not wavering, committed. Now look at what Iran declared on February 20th, 2026. No country can deprive Iran of its nuclear enrichment rights. Enrichment is an undeniable right. Iran's ballistic missiles are essential for deterrence. Zero enrichment is not on the table. And the IRGC conducted live-fire exercises in the Strait of Hormuz while saying it. Shield and helmet, defiant, armed, marching. But Persia is not alone in this prophecy. Ezekiel describes an entire coalition. And when you trace the ancient names to their modern equivalents and overlay what those nations are doing together right now, the alignment is not subtle. It is staring at you. Ezekiel 38:2-6. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, the leader of the coalition. And Ezekiel provides a geographical marker that eliminates ambiguity. Ezekiel 38:15. And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company and a mighty army. The far north, the uttermost parts of the north. The first-century historian Josephus identified Magog with the Scythians, the peoples who inhabited the steppes north of the Black Sea and the Caucasus, territory that corresponds precisely to modern Russia and Ukraine. Take a globe. Place your finger on Jerusalem. Draw a line directly north. It passes through Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, the Black Sea, and arrives at Moscow. No other major world capital sits as precisely due north of Jerusalem as Moscow does. Russia, the leader from the far north. And on February 19th and 20th, 2026, Russian warships were conducting joint live-fire naval exercises with Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Not in a diplomatic communique, in the water, with missiles, with submarines, with coordinated air, sea, and special forces operations. The two nations Ezekiel placed at the center of his coalition were practicing war together. This week, while a president was saying hell to pay in the cabinet room, Persia, Iran, named directly, the nation at the center of the largest military encirclement in over 20 years, the nation that refused to yield on the same day an armada entered its theater. Cush, translated as Ethiopia in many English Bibles, but in the ancient world, Cush referred to the regions south of Egypt, modern Sudan, and parts of East Africa. Sudan has maintained periods of military cooperation with Iran and has served as a conduit for weapons shipments to Iranian proxies. Put Libya and possibly broader North Africa. Libya has been fragmented since 2011, and Russia has actively exploited that vacuum through the Wagner Group and the Africa Corps. Russian military presence in Libya places Russian-aligned forces in the exact territory Ezekiel named. Gomer. Josephus identified Gomer with the Galatians of Asia Minor, corresponding to modern central Turkey. Togarma of the North Quarters, Eastern Turkey, Armenia, and the Caucasus. Turkey today maintains strategic ambiguity between its NATO membership and its deepening relationships with Moscow and Tehran. It cooperates with Russia on energy. It hosts Iranian trade. It positions itself as a bridge between Western and anti-Western power structures. And it occupies the exact geographical territory Ezekiel assigned to multiple members of the coalition. And many people with the unnamed allies, additional nations that join as the coalition assembles. Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, Sudan, and many others. Written 2,600 years ago. Cooperating militarily, economically, and strategically right now in ways that did not exist a generation ago. Now, here is the detail from Ezekiel that transforms the coalition from a pattern into a mechanism. Because Ezekiel does not say these nations carefully planned their invasion of Israel through rational strategic calculus. He says God drags them into it. Ezekiel 38:4. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Hooks in the jaw. The image is of a massive creature being pulled forward by a hook lodged in its mouth. It does not fully choose its course. It is compelled, dragged, drawn by forces beyond its control toward a confrontation it may not have fully chosen, but cannot escape. Now look at February 20th, 2026, and tell me the hooks are not visible. A president issues an ultimatum backed by the largest military buildup in over 2 decades. That is a hook. Iran's regime cannot accept the terms without collapsing politically. Dismantling its nuclear program means surrendering its primary source of strategic leverage and national pride. That is a hook. The military encirclement forces Iran to respond with provocative exercises of its own, which confirms the threat assessment that justified the buildup, which tightens the encirclement further. Escalation feeding escalation. That is a hook. Russia's alliance with Iran deepens with every new crisis, pulling Moscow further into a Middle Eastern confrontation it may not have sought on its own terms, but cannot abandon without losing strategic credibility. That is a hook. Sometimes war is not chosen. It is triggered. One miscalculation, one drone that crosses the wrong line, one intercepted missile that fails to intercept. And suddenly, nations are at war at a time and place they did not pick, dragged forward by hooks they did not see until it was too late, exactly as Ezekiel described. But now comes the part that demands the most honesty, because Ezekiel does not just describe the coalition and the mechanism, he describes the condition under which the invasion occurs, and that condition has not been met. Ezekiel 38:11. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. The invasion happens when Israel is dwelling securely, at rest, in unwalled villages, without bars or gates. A nation that has let its guard down. A nation that believes the existential threat has been addressed. A nation at peace. That is not Israel today. Not remotely. Israel is on high alert across every front. Missile defense systems are activated. The IDF is at maximum readiness. The Prime Minister has publicly stated that Israel is prepared for any scenario. Preemptive strike planning against Iran is underway. This is a nation bracing for impact, not resting in peace. And that distinction is prophetically critical. It means that the current moment, as dramatic and aligned as it is not the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. The coalition is assembling. The hooks are tightening. The nations are positioning. But the condition that triggers the invasion has not arrived. Israel is not dwelling safely. This is not fulfillment. The invasion has not come. God has not intervened with earthquake and fire and brimstone. The coalition has not descended upon the mountains of Israel. But consider this. What would need to happen for the condition to be met? A peace agreement, a security framework, a deal that degrades Iran's nuclear capability enough for Israel to believe the threat has passed, a multinational covenant that provides security guarantees, perhaps exactly the kind of pressure-backed, internationally mediated agreement that the current military buildup is designed to produce. The hell to pay warning is designed to force a deal. And a deal that succeeds, a deal that convinces Israel the Iranian nuclear threat has been neutralized, would create the very condition Ezekiel requires. Israel would dwell safely. The walls would come down. The guard would drop. And the coalition that has been forming in the background would see its opportunity. The current crisis could create the very condition that triggers the prophecy it resembles. That is not fulfillment, but it is proximity. And the gap between where we are and where Ezekiel says the invasion begins has never been narrower. When Persia stands defiant in the headlines, students of Scripture take notice. Not because this is the moment, but because the pattern that leads to the moment is assembling faster and more visibly than at any point in modern history. And the mechanisms that could bridge the remaining gap are operating right now, in real time, on the front pages of every newspaper on Earth. There is one more prophetic thread that connects to what we are watching. And this one does not come from Ezekiel. It comes from Daniel. And it describes something that should make anyone watching the current diplomatic architecture sit up and pay very close attention. Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. This verse is one of the most studied, most debated, and most consequential prophecies in all of Scripture. It describes the final 7 years of Daniel's 70-week prophecy, the period that inaugurates the climax of human history. And the event that starts the clock is not a war. It is not a natural disaster. It is not a supernatural sign in the sky. It is an agreement, a covenant, confirmed with many, for 1 week, meaning 7 years. Let me break this verse apart piece by piece, because every detail matters for understanding why the current moment is significant. He shall confirm the covenant. The Hebrew word translated as confirm is gabar, which means to strengthen, to make strong, to cause, to prevail. It does not mean to create from nothing. It means to take something that already exists, a framework, a negotiation, an agreement in principle, and make it binding. Strengthen it, finalize it, give it teeth. The implication is that the covenant being confirmed is not invented on the spot. It is the culmination of a diplomatic process that has been developing perhaps for years before the moment of confirmation arrives. That is a critical detail, because it means the infrastructure for the covenant does not need to appear overnight. It can be built gradually, through rounds of negotiations, through multilateral frameworks, through pressure-backed diplomacy that tests and refines the structures of international agreement-making long before the final confirmation occurs. With many, not with one nation, not a bilateral agreement between two parties. With many, the Hebrew word is rabbim, meaning great in number. This is a multinational agreement, multiple parties, multiple signatories, multiple stakeholders. The scope of the covenant is broad. It involves many nations, many interests, and many layers of diplomatic commitment. For 1 week, one prophetic week, 7 years. The duration is specific, and at the midpoint, 3.5 years in, the leader who confirmed it violates it. He causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. He commits what Daniel calls the abomination of desolation. The covenant that began as a framework for peace becomes the vehicle for the greatest betrayal in history. Now let me be absolutely clear. No such covenant exists today. There is no 7-year agreement in effect. There is no temple event. There is no midpoint betrayal. None of the specific identifiable conditions of Daniel 9:27 have been fulfilled. Anyone who claims this verse is being fulfilled right now is getting ahead of the text. The covenant has not been confirmed. But here is what demands attention. Consider the architecture of what is being constructed in the current crisis. Not the deal itself, the architecture, the machinery, the framework. Right now, the United States is engaged in a multinational diplomatic effort to produce an agreement centered on the security of Israel and the stability of the Middle East. The negotiations involve multiple mediating parties. Oman is facilitating indirect talks. Geneva is hosting rounds of negotiation. The United States is providing military leverage. European allies are participating in sanctions enforcement and diplomatic coordination. Gulf states are involved as regional stakeholders. Israel's security demands are at the center of the framework. Iran's nuclear capability is the trigger. And the entire structure is backed by overwhelming military force designed to compel agreement. That is a multinational, pressure-backed, Israel-centered diplomatic architecture involving many parties. It addresses nuclear programs, ballistic missiles, proxy networks, and regional security guarantees. It is being mediated through international institutions and bilateral channels simultaneously. And its stated purpose is to produce a comprehensive agreement that reshapes the security landscape of the Middle East. Does that sound familiar? The specific deal being discussed, a nuclear agreement with Iran, is almost certainly not the covenant Daniel described. The scope is different. The duration is different. The leader who confirms it has not been identified. The temple conditions do not exist. I am not claiming this is Daniel 9:27, but the machinery being built to produce it is precisely the kind of machinery that Daniel's prophecy would require. Multinational, pressure-backed, Israel-centered, involving many, built through rounds of negotiation that test and refine the diplomatic structures. And here is the detail that should arrest you. The Hebrew word gabar, to strengthen or confirm, implies that the final covenant is not created from nothing. It is the strengthening of something that already exists, which means the frameworks being tested right now, the negotiation channels, the multilateral structures, the precedent of military-backed diplomacy producing comprehensive agreements. These could be the very foundations that a future leader strengthens into the covenant Daniel described. Think about what has been built in the last year alone: the Geneva Channel, the Oman Mediation Framework, the U.S.-Israel Security Coordination Architecture, the precedent of Operation Midnight Hammer, proving that military action can compel diplomatic engagement. The infrastructure of sanctions, military positioning, and multilateral negotiation, all operating simultaneously toward a single agreement. None of this existed a decade ago. The diplomatic muscles were not developed. The channels were not open. The precedents were not set. But they exist now. And every new round of talks, every new framework tested, every new crisis that produces a new diplomatic response adds another layer to the infrastructure that Daniel's covenant would require.